So good afternoon, everyone, and I'm so excited to chat to you today. And thank you, Molly, for the introduction. So my name is Mary Agbesanwa. I work currently at PwC PriceWaterhouseCoopers. And yeah, I'm really excited to chat to you guys today and share a bit about my career story to date and also what I've done post-university. I studied economics at the University of Birmingham, really enjoyed it. Um, and I now work in consulting. So I would say I'm passionate about two things. I'm really passionate about the future of the financial services industry and how technology is democratizing access to financial services products and services so that people who didn't have access are able to access it now. And also supporting millennials, particularly female millennials, to achieve their full potential. So my day job is I work at PwC, as I mentioned. I currently run our Global FinTech Accelerator program, which is an exciting program that actually got publicly announced today, where we work with interesting, innovative, high growth B2B fintechs and partner with them to sell to our corporate clients. So anything to do with kind of fintechs, financial inclusion, I'm really passionate about. And I basically get paid to speak to fintech founders all day, which is really good. Also, I spend 20% of my time driving our diversity inclusion activities. So everything from our recruitment programs to inclusion in our own organization. I spend one day a week of running activities and launching initiatives in relation to that, which is really aligned to my passions as well. I also co-lead our firm's multicultural business network, which is a bit like, I guess, maybe a student ACS society, African Caribbean society. Our multicultural business network is for our Black, Asian and minority ethnic colleagues, and it's all about celebrating the multiculturalism of our UK firm. We have just over 20,000 people in the UK from over 120 different nationalities. So the conversation about multiculturalism is basically inherent to the work that we do. And any given point, PwC employees outside of COVID are working all around the world. So we know that kind of cultural awareness is something really pivotal to the way that our employees must think. Outside of work, I'm also a careers blogger. So I have a blog called A Millennial's Diary on Medium, where I blog about kind of career and personal development and navigating the corporate world. And I also run a female millennial self-development community called the Now You're Talking Network. So again, really passionate about supporting female millennials in their kind of personal development and career development. So whether that's getting their first promotion or salary negotiation, as well as launching a side hustle and becoming an entrepreneur. That's everything I'm really excited about. Yeah, so really excited to chat to you guys today.
That's brilliant, Mary. Thank you so much. And Nabeela, the same for you. Could you give us an overview as well of your role and your journey too?
Yeah, sure. So thank you ever so much for having me here, and I'm like super excited to take part in this event. I think it's going to be fantastic and great opportunity for people and students. So I'm a program director within GlaxoSmithKline, and that's a pharmaceutical company based in headquarters in the UK. I've been with GSK for 5 years now, but I've been in industry for I'm going to say the word nearly 20 years. So you know, there's a lot of history, a lot of background that we could pack in. But you know, just to give you a top line of really what I do in GSK, I'm part of the process improvement team. So really ensuring we've got straightforward processes and the way we work is streamlined. How I got there, wow! Now that it's such a diversive way that I got there, really, and I'm glad I've got there how I did. So I've got a degree in pharmacology. I finished that degree and kind of went straight into the traditional way of that you would use a pharmacology degree, right? Straight into the lab, and started and did a couple of years in the lab, and I knew instantly that that was not really the place for me to be. So I took that courageous step to say, you know, this might be the traditional way to take my degree, but actually it's not working for me. So what was working for me was more the business side of the pharmaceutical sector. and I went on to a graduate program with a company 2 years after graduating, and I think that was instrumental to the way I approached the rest of my career journey. That graduate program just allowed me to see so many different elements of a business and how a business is run, and I got so much from that. I then went to work in a large other pharmaceutical company after the graduate program, and again had a multiple variety of roles. Call me Jack or Jane of all trades, right? And that's how I enjoyed doing my career. So it really allowed me to see holistically over the entire the way the company was run. And then that kind of molded how I am now, which is really underpins the way I work with process improvement, project management, seeing a process from start to end and all the individual elements within that. And I must admit, it's really given me a lot of exposure in a lot of different areas within GSK and in other industries, companies that I've worked with. The other thing that I do in Embrace is that I'm part of the leadership team for our employee resource group, that is based for race and ethnicity, and it's called Embrace. And that's a group. We are volunteers, so it's not part of my day job, if you want to say. I'm not employed to do that, but I'm a volunteer at GSK to ensure that there's equity for our minority ethnic employees across the company, and really ensuring that GSK is doing the right things by those employees. So I'm sure we'll go into more details as we talk, but that was just a skim the surface, Molly.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, all three of you. And so now we've understood sort of your journeys and who you are. I'd love to sort of press on and just go over the general topic then of diversity and inclusion, and get an understanding of how you understand diversity and inclusion, what that is for you. So Kema, could we start with you, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone on this call is going to have a different definition, right? And I think part of the challenge as well is making sure that everyone's definition is heard. So when I think of diversity, and I'm sure everyone's probably heard this before, but I think the D is about having a seat at the table. So making sure that everyone has that equality. I think the inclusion piece is not just having the seat at the table, but it's about making sure that everybody has a voice at that table. And then finally, within that, you have this sense of belonging and part of the culture. So it's not just about having the voice at the table, but it's about making sure that that voice is heard, right? So that's kind of how I think of diversity and inclusion. And then within that, you have like intersectionality, which I think always needs to be brought to the table when like discussing any issues around like diversity and inclusion. And I'm not entirely sure that everybody, I mean, it's not something that I knew a lot about, and I've had to do a lot of reading to kind of help myself understand, and I'm still on a learning journey myself. But it's about within, like, let's say we're discussing race, for example, if we're talking about Black people, the lived experience of a Black man and a Black woman is two different things. If there is a Black woman who identifies as gay, then, you know, her lived experience isn't going to be the same as someone who identifies as straight. So it's about making sure that within those groups and within those discussions that nobody are left behind. So that's kind of how, yeah, I think of like the D&I.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much. And for, again, I really like, yeah, that we're thinking of the bigger picture as well, and that intersectionality. There's a lot to really think and consider within that too. So thank you. Mary, would you like to give your understanding next?
Sure thing. I think I would generally agree with a lot of what Kema said. I'm sure people might have heard that phrase, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think I've always really liked that, because I think it's not just about getting people in workplaces or in universities just to improve stats or numbers. Actually, it's about how they feel in those places and in those environments, and do they feel welcomed? So that's what I'm really passionate about. So stopping people feeling like they're a token Asian person in their workplace or in their university, but actually that they are of equal value, that they deserve to take up space, contribute, and that they're worth it essentially, and that they deserve to be part of that environment. I really liked as well that Kema mentioned intersectionality, which is something everyone should read up on. I think it's really interesting. And I guess at PwC, we often talk about the business case versus the moral case. So the business case for D&I is really about recognizing there's lots of research and reports out there that talk about the benefit of having diversity of thought and people from different backgrounds. And I even did my dissertation on the topic of gender equality on FTSE 500 boards, and how that means if companies have more women on their boards, it means they're more likely to be profitable. There's that piece, but there's also the moral case that actually, if your workplace doesn't represent what society looks like, then you're probably leaving yourself at risk. And what does that mean in terms of equity and fairness? So I like to think of it from both the business and moral case, and recognize that some people are incentivized by numbers and profits, and some people are maybe incentivized by just wanting to live in a just world. And hopefully some of us are incentivized by both.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Mary. And Nabeela, finally, what would you say your understanding would be?
Yeah, so I think Kema and Mary have articulated it beautifully, right? You know, that the analogies that they've made are spot on. And really, you know, I can only echo that it's so important to society and companies to have diversity of thinking, diversity, and as you know, they both said, it's not just about being part of the conversation, it's about being included in the conversation, listened to, you know, and encouraged actually to speak up and be part of that. So it's a duty of the company to make you feel like you're bringing your authentic self to work, and we must all promote that as well, and hold companies accountable if they're not, right? And the two elements I'll just pick up on as well. It was equity. So it's not just about equality. Equality is giving everyone the same opportunity. Equity is about seeing what the difference is in someone, and honing that difference to allow them to be able to you know, be on the same table with all the same right tools for them. And I think the other one is the intersectionality piece. I think that's absolutely key. We are not one-dimensional. No one is one-dimensional. You know, no one is just black. No one is just a woman. You know, no one is just whatever. And so we are all made up of different elements and different dimensions, and that needs to also be something that companies, managers, senior leaders need to appreciate, that there is that diversity within people that makes us special, that makes us different, that makes it more important to have that around the table, because one-dimensional thinking with that middle class white male, for example, will always give you a middle class white male thought process. And we know that that is not good enough for companies, because companies are making a loss because they don't have diverse and inclusive workforces.
Yeah, really, yeah, loving, like, the sort of really looking into this really clearly now. And I guess we're sort of moving on to the company side there, but before we start to look at what different companies are doing in inclusion, and to make sure that all voices are heard and brought to the table, could we look back to university and your experiences of whilst you at university? And I mean, would anyone like to answer this question? You know, what were your experiences of diversity and inclusion at university?
I don't mind. I'll go first. University was a very long time ago, a significantly long time ago, that I challenged myself to remember. But no, in truth, you know, I'll take it from a different aspect, right? Because I think in university, I myself personally was pretty naive. I think naive in terms of I didn't see my color, and I don't know if that's such a cliche way of expressing it, but honestly, I didn't. I didn't think I was different to anyone else. I didn't think I was different to the person who was next to me, who might have been white, who might have been Chinese or Oriental or wherever. To me, it didn't resonate. That person was the same. And I didn't really also see that there was any encouragement from my university to recognize that people might have been different. So actually, maybe they were also colorblind, you know? And so retrospectively now, though, I look back on it and say, and think to myself, did I actually miss a trick? Was I too blinkered in what I was seeing because I was just seeing what I wanted to see? Was I seeing actually the difficulties that my other Asian colleague or student friend was having? And maybe because I was okay, I assumed she was okay or he was okay. But actually, that I might have just been fortunate. And I think in my life, I have been fortunate that I haven't had so much, the challenges around this, but other people do have challenges around this. And it's important to recognize that, that is very true. And I'd say the other piece around, from my perspective in terms of uni, that I did see that groups were sticking together, right? So Asian guys, girls, Muslims, whatever, were sticking together, and I just thought, well, okay, they enjoy that, they have the same interests, they obviously want to do that, that's fine. For me, it was more about having a bright, bigger scope of individuals around me. Now I look back and I think, were those groups marginalized and not included? And did they feel like they didn't have a mechanism to allow them to speak up, to say, I am feeling marginalized? And so they just kind of stayed back. So there's two elements. I retrospectively can look back and say, okay, maybe I was a bit blinkered, but during that time, I felt that I was doing the right thing for me.
Thanks, Nabeela. Yeah, I think it's great to sort of look back on these kinds of experiences with another perspective. And I guess that kind of gives you a bit more maybe food for thought. And I guess thinking about that, is there any advice that you might give to students who might be feeling the same way? Because I think you're right, sometimes we do kind of get those different sort of groups in social circles, and you're right, is it a case of similar interests, or do groups feel marginalized? Is there anything that you might suggest students do to maybe explore that?
Yeah, I guess don't conform to what you think you need to be, right? So I'm Asian, I've predominantly been brought up in the UK or lived all my life in the Southeast, okay? And conformity meant that maybe I should stick with what I know, stick with my kind, stick with the people who culturally understand me. But I didn't want to do that because actually that's not how I was brought up as a family. So don't feel like you have to conform. If you don't have to. And as Kema was saying, her African background, was it African? Sorry, Kema was saying, you should have a career that should be either accounting or doctors or something tangible. And so we get bias ourselves. So challenge your own bias, challenge your own internal thinking, and say, am I comfortable with how I am portraying myself, and am I being true to myself? So challenge yourself, don't feel like you have to conform, and actually speak up and challenge others as well, within appropriately.
That's great advice. Thank you, Nabeela. And Kema or Mary, do you have any comments or anything to add? Were there any particular challenges that either of you faced at university, and what advice might you give to students in relation to that?
Yeah, I can go next. So it's really interesting. I think when I was at university, I mentioned that I studied economics. I think the conversation I was often having about D&I was that around gender. So my course was probably about 70% male. And that was something we were all quite aware of, that it was quite heavily male dominated, and a lot of economic students get encouraged to go into investment banking, which is again quite a male dominated industry and sector. So that was something quite front of mind. And actually what I did was set up the Women in Finance Society at the University of Birmingham. And that was really because in my first year of university, I was talking to other women on my course about applying to spring weeks and internships. And a lot of the women that I spoke to were just, they were a bit nervous about applying, felt like they had misconceptions and preconceptions about banking as an industry, and they just weren't keen on applying and thought they wouldn't get in, or they thought they wouldn't be able to work in those spaces and have work-life balance and things like that. So I thought, why don't I create a society where it would just be women in those sessions, and also provide an avenue for banks to meet us, and we can meet senior women from those industries as well. So yeah, I started that in my first year of university, then chaired it for the next 2 years, and that society grew to have over more than 200 women from across the campus from loads of different subjects. And that was really exciting. And I think for me, that was, I guess my main focus was around kind of the gender imbalance on my course, and also encouraging people outside of economics to get involved in banking and financial services more generally. But I think I would agree with what Nabeela mentioned as well. Yeah, university can be a bit of similar to the workplace. People kind of going into groups of people from similar backgrounds, and that's usually because that's where people feel most comfortable. And it happens in the workplace as well. And I guess to anyone listening, I would just encourage you to actually just be inquisitive and not be afraid to approach people from different backgrounds, whether that's in like group coursework or in your seminars, or even in the houses that you reside in. How do you make sure you utilize this time to find out more about other cultures? I also went to a boarding school that had loads of people from around the world, and I think from a young age I learned to be interested in people from different backgrounds. And I think that is something, again, as we enter a workplace where your colleagues won't necessarily be from the UK, actually they could be from all parts of the world. Kind of that cultural dexterity is really important.
That's great, thank you, Mary. We've had a question in the chat from Kiara. So on that topic, she has asked, how can we as individuals make others more comfortable?
Can we get clarity? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I don't know who spoke.
No, go ahead, Mary.
Oh, okay. I'm happy to have a go at answering. How can we as individuals make others more comfortable? I think part of it is, so we have this concept called Colour Brave at PwC, which is all about being bold, talking about race in the workplace. And a key part of being colour brave, maybe as opposed to colour blind, is actually about, there are 3 components to that. So being brave, being forgiving, and being bold. So being bold, not being afraid to have the conversation, being brave, being willing to be a bit courageous and say, actually, I've seen something is happening in the news. I just wanted to talk about how this might be affecting you. And also being forgiving, like the conversation about D&I is always changing. There's always new words, BIPOC, intersectionality, BAME, like a lot of people stumble around all the terminology. Actually, I think just as if someone had a broken leg, you would ask them what was wrong or what happened. You should do the same with approaching conversations about D&I and not be afraid to kind of stumble on your words a bit. Actually, most people will just appreciate the intention. But obviously, so I think that the first thing is just be willing to be a bit wrong. And actually, that's part of being a bit vulnerable, which is integral to having conversation about D&I.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. I think, if you're entering into a conversation, I think you need to understand what your intentions are before you enter into that conversation. And as Mary was saying, we are going to get some things wrong, and on both sides, right? Because it's a very emotive conversation. But I would say if somebody is coming to you to share a story with you, you have to listen, because they're already expending a lot of energy by coming in and, you know, taking the time to share that moment with you. So even if it's something you don't understand, sometimes it's just about listening, and maybe you go away and you do a bit of work. I also think that there is a responsibility, you know, within the education system, which it should have started in primary school, but hey, we're at university now, so we'll talk about that. Where I think you can put resources out there to help people be able to engage in those conversations. I don't think that we do that enough. We kind of just let people go off and do their own things. So I think, you know, the same way we're not afraid to have the conversations about gender, I think we need to have that bravery when it comes to having conversations about race.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, I've had a few like ambassadors where we've obviously been interested to hear their viewpoint on what experiences they've had in terms of racism. Mm-hmm. Obviously from a viewpoint that we're just wanting to know more and sort of broaden our awareness of what's going on in front of us. But I find sometimes they find it a bit prying, or they're a bit uncomfortable because they have to repeat themselves and nothing's really being done. It's more like a story for them. How would it be best to approach that kind of conversation without sort of tiring them out in that sense emotionally?
I think so. For me, I will say it's obviously coming from a good place that you want to have that conversation, but you need to be able to also enter it with some knowledge. So I would advise that you go and do some reading first. I mean, as I mentioned before, as a person of colour, to always have to talk about their experiences can be quite taxing, and you can become exhausted with that conversation because you're having to repeat yourself over and over again. And a lot of these are painful experiences, when at the time when maybe we tried to share them, we were told that maybe it wasn't about race, or it wasn't about what we were thinking about. So it's not as easy for us to just come up and just then have that conversation. There are so many resources out there. So I think before you go to a person, go to Google and have a look. There's conversations on like white fragility. It's a great place to start. There's so many TED Talks. Do your research so that you're entering into that conversation with, you know, a level of understanding. And yes, you will still get some things wrong, but actually the intent is better.
Yeah, and I'll add to that in terms of absolutely educate yourself, right? Because people of color are not here to educate you. Okay, when we share our experiences and we share our learnings, but it's not about stories. The stories are just an output of the impact, right? So then what we need to do is turn intent into action. So we need to hear those stories, understand why they're being told and what they're resonating in, and put in actions to start to eliminate where some of these experiences have come from. So they're not stories, they're experiences, there are lived in experiences. So turning intent to action is really key.
Would you say in the workplace, if say someone who is less diverse was to notice someone being racist or being unfair to another, would it be appropriate for you as an individual to bring that up to your superior for that person, because obviously they might not feel comfortable, or would that be taking away the power of the individual to make that point? So
I would say you have to be quite balanced, right? And it's up to the impact has happened to that individual, so you must take their consent. You must ensure that their consent, but at the same time, especially with our company, we encourage that you speak up, because if we don't speak up and if we don't make these issues known to senior leaders, managers, the top of the food chain, then how is anything going to be done? Because suppression of issues is where we've kind of got to today, and since many years. So be mindful of how it's impacted the individual, but speak up.
And I think there's ways that you can do it to be inclusive to all without maybe making one person in that conversation feel uncomfortable. So if you're noticing, for example, maybe there's a guy who, when a woman talks all the time, he just interrupts. You can say it to the whole group that, why don't we take this approach when we're having a meeting, rather than saying to X person, why do you keep interrupting when so-and-so is speaking? Because as you're saying, Nabeela, you need to have permission from that person to have that conversation. It's not your place to do so. And in that instance, it's still okay to go to your colleague afterwards and say, I've noticed X, Y, Z. Like, is everything okay? That conversation is fine, but people may not always want you to speak out on their behalf.
So would you say redirecting it so it looks more as a group change rather than just directing it to the individual is the best approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about being inclusive for all, and that's what we have to remember. It's not about leaving any one person behind. If that person always interrupts when people are speaking, then actually he's not being inclusive to all. So you can call people out in that sense, because you also have to look at these things, whether or not this is right, but assume that the person who is doing that also has good intent. Because otherwise, you know, if you go into that conversation with a negative attitude, you're not going to get anywhere in that meeting.
I think I would just add very quickly, I completely agree with what Kema and Nabeela said, but it does depend on the particular situation you're referring to as well. So there will be some situations where straight up it's just not right and you should call it out. So I definitely agree with checking in with the person who was maybe impacted, but do remember this is all, some of this is contextual, so we can't give generally quite blanket advice. There will be certain situations where it's clear to everyone is day that things were wrong, and that behavior shouldn't be tolerated. It's worth mentioning in my workplace there are multiple ways to report things. So we have like anonymous speak up lines, as well as like formal escalation routes, as well as like people and pastoral individuals as well. And I think the university probably has the same. So there should be ways to call things out explicitly, as well as maybe other approaches to suit people's style.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Mary. And George has really handily shared what the university's recommendation is for calling out inappropriate behaviours. So we call these the 4Ds. So yeah, please do have a look at that in there, and it's really, really important thing to raise. So thank you, Kiara, for that. If moving on, I guess on the similar kind of topic, looking at careers and what in being in the workplace. So for students who are now looking to kickstart their careers, what words of inspiration could you provide? And I'll direct that to Nabeela, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Words of inspiration. Okay, be bold and courageous. Take the leap of faith and go with your gut, I'd say. You know, if you really feel like this is the direction you want to take it. You make a mistake, make it, but learn from those, right? Don't be afraid of making mistakes, but learn from those and build on those. So I'd say that. Also, I would say put good networks and advocates around you. Okay, I can't even stress how important that is. It's something I learned way too late on in my career, and I wish I'd known it earlier, right? You know, when you ask that question, what do you wish for that you should have known earlier? I wish I knew that, you know, putting a good network of people around me, people I can bounce information off, people I can kind of say, what do you think? You know, mentors, sponsors, advocates, people who are going to not fight for you, but really encourage your development, are going to encourage your career and give you that true, honest direction. That would be kind of, I guess, my two: be bold, courageous, take risks, and put good network and advocates around you.
Brilliant, thank you. Kamara or Mary, would either of you like to offer your words as well?
Yeah, sure thing. I think, yeah, it's a really difficult time to be a student, I think. Not what, so I can try and give the best advice that I can, but definitely aware, like, life definitely isn't BAU. But I think if I would say any advice to students currently looking to kick off their careers or just even cope at this time, I think it's really, we're at an exciting time where we're just redefining what work even means. So a lot of us might be working from home or just adapting to this new normal. And I guess jobs might not be as easily available as they usually are, even some graduate schemes. So I guess I would definitely encourage you to take any experience that you can get. Your first job doesn't need to be your perfect job. So do just try and learn from anything, fail fast and fail often, because that's really important. But I think what technology has enabled us to do is also means that you don't need a job to start a career. Actually, if you want to be a journalist, you can just create a blog online and just start writing. If you want to be a TV presenter, you can create a YouTube channel. Whatever you want to do, you could just start creating your own career now, and you don't need to wait for some companies to blue tick you. You can do that yourself. So I would really encourage you to think about kind of personal branding and being really clear about what you want to do. Even the new role that I have in my organization, I kind of got that from vocalizing what I'm interested in and talking about my strengths. So I think that's a habit, if you can tap into that early on, will be really beneficial.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mary. With my next question, Kamar, if I could direct this towards you, we talked earlier about diversity and inclusion and how it's really important to have such a mix of people, because, like you mentioned, Mary, earlier in your dissertation, when you're looking at the FTSE companies and how you need more equivalent equity even in gender to be able to prosper. But Kamal, I want to ask you, do you feel that Black talent is underrepresented in the workplace? And if so, what advice would you give to someone who is looking to advance in their career?
I'm going to say, of course it is. I feel like if it wasn't, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But at the same time, I feel like, you know, we are in a position where we are trying to change that narrative, right? So if you're thinking about, you know, how do you advance in your career, just because there aren't lots of people that look like you in that organization, don't let that stop you from being there. Because I think what we need to also appreciate is that there is value in our diversity. If I think about Microsoft as an organization, we create technology which is used by people across the globe, right? And we can't do that if we don't represent our customer base. So we need people that are different to work there. It's really important. I also think, you know, the race thing it's a difficult thing, I think, for organizations to talk about right now. Again, that is because we are on a journey, but we need to be in the organizations to have that conversation. So I would agree with, like, Nabeela and Mary, go out, find your mentors, your sponsors, and be mindful as well that because there aren't that many Black leaders in these organizations, they may also not look like you, but that's okay. You need to find people who share common interests, because you're not just Black. There are other things that you have in common with people. Maybe it's like, there are so many women that I work with in my organization who don't look like me, don't come from the same place as me, but I'm like totally in awe of them. And those people are my mentors. So go out and find those people. Go and ask them. The worst they're going to say to you is no. Then that's fine. You just go find somebody else who will eventually say yes to you. Join networks, because you will find solace in those networks. You know, Mary spoke about creating the Women in Finance. There are lots of things, if you're interested in technology, there's like Black Girls That Code, there's Women That Code, there's so many different networks that you can join. But I would say, be intentional as well. You know, again, this is a very strange time for us. There aren't as many jobs around as maybe there are normally, but do be really intentional about the place that you want to work in. Think about the culture, think about the values of the organisation, make sure that they resonate with you. And once you get into the right place that values you as a human and a person and what you have to offer, you will advance, right? Because your voice, you're in a place where you belong, your voice is heard. So just be really intentional, I'd say, and go out and find the right networks. There are people there to support you. Follow the right people. Podcasts, Mary's got a blog. Go out, read these things. They're here. You know, these are lived experiences. So use all of the information that's around you.
Brilliant, thank you, Kema. I guess you briefly touched upon this as well in what you said then, but can you feel a sense in the change towards attitudes then, towards promoting diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think Microsoft has always been a place that's great at giving you that sense of belonging. So I've always felt that, you know, I can come as I am and do what I love. There's written up there somewhere. However, with the murder of George Floyd this year, what it's done is kind of accelerated that need for change in the business. So we've done a lot of things, like we now have reverse mentoring. So I get mentored by someone who's on our UK kind of SLT, which is amazing. There's also mandatory training around, I mean, we've always had unconscious bias, but this year we had check your privilege, which was introduced, which was really interesting actually. We've joined the change the race ratio. There's building of external partnerships. We have lots more sharing in the business. So it's definitely moved the dial. And what I would say is we all need to kind of get right behind that and push it so it doesn't go away, so we don't lose that momentum.
That's great, thank you, Kema. It's so interesting as well to learn about what's going on in Microsoft and the different ways of promoting diversity and inclusion and talking about race, because it's really important, as we've echoed throughout this, to keep that conversation going. Would Nabeela or Mary, would either of you like to touch upon your thoughts of, you know, can you sense a change in attitudes towards promoting diversity and inclusion, and maybe, you know, what's going on with within either of your companies to do that?
Yeah, I'll quickly jump in, and then, because I know we're just strapped for time, but absolutely there's been a change. And Kema said, you know, it's unfortunate events externally that have perpetuated the race conversation, right? But it's important that we keep that momentum of discussion, we keep the momentum of activities ongoing, and GSK is listening. And I said, I want them to move from intent to action, right? There's the listen piece, and we can educate, but now let's really put those words into action. And we have employee resource groups like Embrace, which I am on in GSK, which supports the company to understand which direction they need to take. So yes, they are waking up, and yes, this conversation is and I would say the conversation is behind the gender agenda, right? The female agenda started long ago. The sexual orientation, you know, agenda started a while ago, and that they have progressed with the company, and now it's you know, it's seamless. We need to get the race agenda as seamless as those others. And we're not there yet. I think across the UK companies, we're not there yet. Some are more advanced than others, but I think we're on the right track. So, Mary.
No, that's all really inspiring to hear, and I would agree with what Nabeela and Kema have said. Yeah, it's really good to hear that companies are doing things. I've particularly loved, although it has taken, global tragic events for that to happen, companies to declare that they're actively anti-racist and that they don't tolerate racism. But I'm positive, but also cautious. Like, for me, I don't really care if your company has posted a black square. Like, that's not enough. Like, no one saw the black square and was like, okay, I'm suddenly fine. Like, I'm doing good. Actually, it's all about the action that happens off the back of that. So I'm really proud and excited that I work for an organization that has been doing things in this space for a long time. We've been voluntarily publishing our ethnicity pay gap for 4 years. So again, we've been ahead of the curve, collecting the data and saying, actually, where do our Black people sit within the organization? And on average, how much does a Black person earn versus a white person? And if there's a disparity, that's weird, and we need to address that. So that's been something that we've done that I've been really proud of, and supporting the communications around that as well, so people understand what those numbers mean. But other things that we've done, literally this week, we've launched our Black Talent in Business program, which is a program that if any of you are in your first year of a 3-year course or a second year of a 4-year course, please do look into it. It's PwC's Black Talent in Business program. You'll get 3 days paid internship virtually, and then on that you'll get a full internship and hopefully get onto our graduate scheme. And that was exactly my entry into the organization. I joined in my first year of university and haven't really looked back since. So I would really encourage you to leverage those kind of early talent schemes. So yeah, I think that's really brilliant. But on the whole, I'm excited about the fact that this is now higher up on the agenda for a lot of organizations. But I do think that we need to kind of keep pressing them, keep this on the agenda so it doesn't slip back to kind of like AOB point 2 kind of thing. But actually it's a forefront of the conversations. And one thing that we've done that I'm really proud of as well is actually look at how D&I intersects with everything we do. So not just recruitment and progression and promotion, which is all really, really important, but also like supply chain. So the people that we hire, the companies that supply our soap in the office, the people, the contractors that we use, are we looking at that? So we've also launched what we call Colour Brave grants. So we've opened up a big pot of money where social enterprises and charities run by Black founders or that have Black beneficiaries can also tap into grants of up to £25,000. So yeah, myself and others in my team have really lobbied for things like that, because I think it's about opening your purse. It's not enough about just posting Black squares and saying you're in solidarity with something, but you know that people in your organization are not happy. So I think no organization is perfect, but so all the students listening now, when you're applying to companies, do ask them these questions. And if they can't give you an answer, then I would strongly encourage you, whatever the global environment, to maybe consider going to that organization, because unfortunately, when something becomes trending, a lot of companies do things and they don't back up what they say with actions and words.
Thank you so much for that, Mary. I know that we're sort of running over time now, but I do have a question from Georgina in the chat. It's directed to Kema. So she says it's great to hear that Microsoft have mandatory check your privilege training, and she'd be interested to hear how that was received, as to some the term privilege is often misunderstood and can be toxic, and also how these lessons are revisited regularly.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'm reading a book at the moment, and as part of the book, they ask you to go out and check your own privilege. And I never really thought of myself as having that much privilege. Like, I'm from a working class background. My mum's biracial, single mother. You know, I thought, yeah, I am deserving of everything, basically. I need everything in that group of Black people. But actually, when I think about checking my own privilege, there are so many pieces of privilege that I have in there. I have a degree, right? Which means that next to me, someone who may be just as qualified for a role may not get it. I might get it because I have a degree. When I make my journey to work, I don't have to think about whether it's an accessible route for me. I just go wherever it is that I'm going. I am a natural citizen of this country, so I don't have to worry about, you know, can I apply for certain jobs, or will I be able to get a visa to go somewhere else? So I think when you put it in that way, when you think about all of the privileges that people have, it kind of softens it. I'm not sure if it's actually called check your privilege. I'm just going to say it's check your privilege because that's how I see it. And that's part of how they explained it in my book. But it is around looking at privilege. And I think once we start to realize that we all have a version of privilege, it makes it a lot easier to enter into that conversation. So that's the way it was kind of built for us.
I'd be really interested to know what the book is. Kamal, would you mind sharing it?
Shameless plug. Actually, let me turn off my thing. So it's So You Want to Talk About Race. I know that there is a similar book which is by Renee, but this one is Ijoma Oluwa. So I'm actually reading it as book club. But it's really interesting actually. And yeah, so she talks a lot about intersectionality, a lot about, you know, checking your privilege, but having to sit there, and do you know what, it's a great exercise as well to show gratitude for the things that you have, just sitting there and thinking about the privilege, because quite often I think, you know, that's why I was talking about intersectionality. There are lots of people within groups that are left behind. that we're not thinking of when we're thinking that we need to help, you know, people that look like us. So really interesting book if anyone wants to read it.
That's great, thanks, Kema. I think actually as well, so George shared earlier a list of books available in the library, and I'm pretty sure that that book is available within that list of resources. So students, if have a look, there are so many really fascinating books in there as well, and I really encourage everyone to just read up on these things, really educate yourself and start having these kinds of conversations. It's been absolutely fantastic to have all of you speak. Thank you so much for providing your perspectives, your advice, your experiences. I really appreciate that it can't be the easiest conversation to always have, but I really appreciate just you coming here and opening it up for all of our students. And I really hope everyone sort of goes away today with something to gain from this, and to bit of momentum as well to keep up this conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's been fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity.
And good to be with ladies too. So yeah, thank you so much.
If we probably don't have time for questions now at the moment, but if anyone does have any questions, do feel free to maybe pose them to me, and I'm happy to share those on. But for now, I'll just say goodbye to Kema, Mary and Nabeela, and thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.